Hi, Alastair. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Yasmin. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It was really good to watch your documentary. I found it really kind of eye-opening into the world of adventure tourism and sport. And it kind of got me thinking about what led you into climbing and in particular to Songdong.
Mm. I mean, it's funny because people often assume that I have a caving background or something like that, but I really don't. I actually grew up in Derbyshire, which I'm sure a lot of the people watching will be aware that it's a caving county, shall we say? It's sort of, for those who aren't aware, it's in the sort of the middle of England, and it's on. I grew up in a little town called Ashbourne, which is on the. It's called the gateway to the Peak District, where there are a lot of caves. But I don't recall visiting any caves at all during the period I was growing up there, which is funny. And making the film, I obviously spent a lot of time with cavers, Adam Spillane, Howard Limbert, Helen Adams, Jonathan Sims, all the people who are interviewed in the film. And it's funny because a lot of people have this idea of cavers as these slightly insidious people who go and just crawl around in the mud in dark and dingy places, and that's sort of the stereotype which is perpetuated with cavers, when actually it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, I spent a lot of time with the caving community, and that they're explorers. There's no other way to describe it. It's mentioned briefly in the film by Bill Stone, but caving is one of the last, probably the last exploration opportunity we have on this planet, aside from maybe sort of the deep sea. So that for me was a really interesting sort of side note on the film. But in terms of Songdong itself, I mean, I first went there in 2017 on a tourist trip, and yeah, I went back 8 times after that, making the film. But that first experience for me was really is indelibly struck in my mind, because it is such a powerful place. I mean, I wouldn't really describe myself as a religious person, but it really did affect me quite deeply on a
Mm.
spiritual level. And I think there's that thing about nature is so natural. I mean, it seems silly to say, but it's so natural, and we live in a world quite often where we don't really get a chance to experience its purity in an absolute sense, a place which hasn't been touched for millions and millions of years. When you go to a place like that, I mean, it really is quite breathtaking.
Yeah, it looks stunning from what the video, like the film looks stunning visually. And I'm wondering if, I mean, the name is quite interesting for me, A Crack in the Mountain, because it's so stunning and it's such an ecosystem. I'm wondering what led you to kind of call the film A Crack in the Mountain.
So it's a good question. I mean, the film was for a long time was called The People of Songdong. That was really the title for a very long time, and I quite like that title. But then I ran it past a few people, and I got um, fairly lukewarm responses, shall we say? And I was going through various interviews of guests, and there was one guest who when I say guests, I mean visitors to Songdong, and there was one who described the entrance of the cave as like a crack in the mountain, and it really is that. I mean, I'm sure everyone who's watching this has seen the film, and Jonathan Drake, who's interviewing the film, talks about it as this little hole with a whole bunch of rocks around it, and it really is that. It's very innocuous. Very innocuous. I mean, if you walked past it, you wouldn't do, because it's deep in the jungle. But if you did walk past it, you wouldn't really think it was really anything at all. And then, of course, it opens up into this magnificent underground kingdom. So that really was what kind of inspired the title. And then doing various audience Q&As over the past year, a few people have commented that the film itself is similar to that, in that the film starts as somewhat of a pretty little nature documentary, and then opens up into something which is sort of a
Mm.
wider social political discussion on Vietnam, and also how we treat our natural heritage. Now, that wasn't really something I thought about myself when I was making the film, but I do think that's quite a interesting read.
Mm. So tell me, how did you do it? I know that you went out there and you shot the film on your own, from what it sounds like. Um, how was that? Did you just go out and decide to film a documentary? Did you take multiple trips back and forth? How did the kind of narrative end up shifting from more of a kind of environmental documentary towards a social one?
The film went through various iterations. I mean, when I first went there in 2017, I had this idea of doing this sort of 20-30 minute little YouTube piece on just the cave. I took a camera there. It wasn't really any more than that. I had a feeling it was going to be quite spectacular, and I wanted to document that. And actually, a lot of the footage from that first trip is in the final film, but it was no more than just the little YouTube thing. And then, having done that trip and went home to reflect, I realized that there really was something bigger here. So the next stage of the film's iteration was I conceived this, what I thought in my mind was going to be sort of a 40-minute triptych. So I wanted to describe the cave through 3 different perspectives. So one of the cave experts or cave explorers, which was Adam Spillane, who was one of the team who originally explored the cave, and then one of the porters, and then one of the guests, who at that time was a second generation American, Vietnamese American, who was visiting the cave for the first time. So that was kind of the next iteration, and that was in 2018. And then it was only really when I discovered the story of the town of Phong Nha and how it was impacted by the discovery of Song Dong that I realized that there was an even larger story to be told here. And that's when I realized that there was probably a feature film in this, because, you know, it's all very well making a 90-minute piece just on the cave, but I don't think that's the most compelling part of the film, to be honest. For me, it's how the cave has impacted the community of Phong Nha. So it was when I found that human story, I realized that it could be something much bigger.
Mm. Did you find yourself running into kind of any issues? I mean, it's obviously a very censored country to be working as a filmmaker or a journalist, particularly around kind of social and environmental issues, as it showed in the documentary. I mean, how was it filming out there, given those circumstances?
Well, it's funny because I actually don't think a lot of people are aware as to how much authoritarian control there is in Vietnam. I mean, everyone knows about China, but I just get the sense that people just aren't that aware that Vietnam is a communist one-party state with very strict controls over really everything. I mean, I've been engaging with people on social media about this, and I've had a lot of comments. When a Vietnamese national made a comment on Facebook and said, "How can I watch the film?" And I said, "It's going to be a bit tricky to get it past the government censor, etc., etc." And I got a few replies from what I assume are Western individuals who said, "Well, why would it be tricky to get past the censor?" And I think there's potentially a lack of awareness about how Vietnam is positioned in the world, and I think that's not really a criticism of anyone, because it was largely the same for me. I mean, there's a scene in the film where I'm sure everyone can remember this. We're filming by the side of the road, and there's a time lapse of a lady holding a Save Song Dong sign, and then a policeman pulls up, and the way the scene is conceived, it's almost like a rug pull. The music is building and building and building to this dramatic moment, and suddenly we just pull it out. And that's really how I felt at the time, because I was quite naive when I was filming. I wanted to, the idea of that scene was to go around Ho Chi Minh with a sign, and she would stand there, and I would do sort of a 10-minute time lapse at one site and a 10-minute time lapse at another site, and then I'd sort of put it all together. And we started by this road. As you can see, it wasn't anything, wasn't in a tourist area, it was just on the outskirts. And within 10 minutes, an undercover copper pulled up and was basically ordering her to take the sign down. And it was a real eye opener for me. And so it's not there is that thing about Vietnam and being sort of the little brother to China, etc., etc. But I didn't, aside from that moment, and that was in 2018, I didn't really encounter any difficulties, partly because I was quite deliberate from that moment to fly under the radar. I didn't hide anything in terms of what I was doing with Oxalis Adventure, who run tours of the cave. They were always very aware of what I was doing, and they actually recorded an interview about me making the film, which I don't think will see the light of day. But so I didn't hide anything, but I also didn't sort of wave a flag or anything like that. So, I mean, at a certain point, when I realized I had everything in the can, I did started to get a little bit more bold, and I wrote to the local PPC, the local government in Quang Binh province, and invited them to comment, and they didn't really understand what I was asking, to be honest. So it didn't really go much further than that. but I was less worried about my own safety and more worried about those people who participated in the film. That was always my big concern, and there was a lot of, I had to think very hard about who said what, particularly Hung and Zhang, who are the two activists in the film, and that's why the Bill Hayden, sorry, I almost got his name wrong. Bill Hayden, it makes comments in the film because he can say things which they can't. And then we have the porters. There's a scene in the house where the porters are talking amongst themselves about the fate of the town, and a lot of that I had to cut because they were aware that I was sitting there filming, but they weren't aware of the power of the camera. So I had to be very cautious about what was said because they were in their private space, and when they're in their private space, they're obviously complaining a lot about how things go because there's a lack of oversight, there's a lack of invitation of contribution from the local community about how the development of the town will go. They're basically told what will happen, and there's no public forum, so they're obviously quite frustrated about that. But I had to be very careful about who said what.
I mean, since the documentary was released, well, you finished filming in 2022, wasn't it? I mean, how has the situation changed since then? I mean, it seems like the cable car for now isn't happening. Have there been any more developments? Have you been in touch with any of the activists that were in the documentary?
So I finished filming. I always get confused with the dates. I finished filming in 2021. So I thought I'd finished in March 2020, and I just got back from Vietnam. And what I was planning on doing was just putting together what I'd filmed in that what I thought was a final trip, collecting my thoughts, and then going back in sort of April 2020 for a final shoot to pick up a few bits and pieces. And then of course COVID happened, and I was locked out of the country, and I spent 9 months trying to get back in when the borders were closed, and I finally managed to get back in while the borders were closed, in a way which I'm probably not going to announce on camera, but I managed to do it. And the effects of COVID and the pandemic on Phong Nha was brutal. I mean, it's displayed in the film. I mean, it really is true. 95% of businesses just got destroyed, and it got, since that final trip in February 2021, that it got a lot worse for the town. It's only just rebounding right now, and with that presents a danger that the easy road will be taken, i.e., big construction will start in Phong Nha, big hotels, in order to cater for Vietnamese tourists who became the bedrock of the tourist economy there, because obviously Westerners weren't coming in, and Vietnamese do tend in general to like luxury over ecotourism, certainly now at this moment in time, although hopefully that is changing slowly. So and that of course then brings the potential for things like cable cars, which are tremendously popular in Vietnam, and I went to most of them that they're briefly in the film, and that they are phenomenally successful as business enterprises, and I think that's why the Quang Binh PVC was so surprised in 2014 when the cable car got such an adverse reaction. So there is a danger that with COVID the easy road will be taken, but actually right now there's been no new developments in terms of how the film ends. There's still a commitment not to build a cable car to Songdong, but they always say until 2020. So it's positive and encouraging, but at the same time there is sort of a degree of trepidation about how things could potentially change in the future.
And it's incredible, really, because the documentary does capture this kind of sense of awe about this place that's clearly very special, and it kind of draws you in. Like, I think as humans we have this naturally kind of curious need to explore places in the world, and do you ever feel as a filmmaker there's like any like feeling of a responsibility, or I don't know, like a feeling of, should I be displaying this place, should I be showing it off to the world? I mean, I guess it wasn't long till it'd been discovered that you started filming it as well. So you kind of got there right at the start of its development.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a question I've thought about quite deeply. I mean, what from a filmmaker's perspective, obviously I want the film to be seen by as many people as possible, but what impact does that have on the cave itself? Does it mean that more people want to go there? Does it mean that the vocal minority, which is asking for a cable car, will become the vocal majority because there's more people? And obviously, I thought about that quite deeply. My thoughts on that are that actually the film itself is probably the best possible thing for the town of Fengya. And I just want to qualify that because it's something which I really want people to understand. The thing about films like this and their impact for me is, the question always is, who is the best audience for the film? And often with these impact documentaries, it is the people who are directly affected, the people in the country. I mean, for example, you have there's a wonderful documentary called, I think it's called President, which is about the Vietnamese, sorry, not the Vietnamese, the Zimbabwean election process. And for the best audience for that particular film is the Zimbabwean people themselves, because they're just not aware of the amount of corruption going on. For this film, I'm of the strong belief that the best audience for this film are Western tourists going to Fengya, because what is described in the documentary is nothing new for the Vietnamese. In fact, the documentary A Crack in the Mountain is actually quite passé in terms of how it deals with the social politics. Everyone is aware of what's happening in Vietnam, and the film does not go into any sort of detail on the amount of corruption, etc., etc. So to the Vietnamese, this is nothing new in terms of what's being described in terms of the conversation and the arguments, etc., etc. So for me, the best audience is Westerners going to Fengya, because I suspect that a lot of people who visit Fengya, if they were asked by local government officials, and they do this, they do ask Westerners, how would you like this town to evolve and grow? That has been a question which is asked of people who go to Songdong and go to Fengya. And I think overwhelmingly, a lot of Westerners will say, yeah, we're strong advocates of ecotourism. We want to protect this place. We want you to preserve this place. And the Vietnamese government are very responsive to that sort of level of feedback, because at the end of the day, they're just responsive. They're responsive to their customers. So this is why I think that ultimately, if people are able to see this film and visit Fengya and communicate, if they feel the same, that ecotourism and sustainability is absolutely the way forward, I think that would have a very, very positive impact on Fengya.
Do you feel like the tourists coming into Fengya have more of an influence over what happens to the landscape than the locals themselves?
Absolutely, 100%, because the Fengya as an economy is set up 99% now for tourism. I mean, this is why COVID was such a destructive act, because there was nothing else. They just had to go back to rice farming. There really wasn't any other option. I mean, it really is one of the most, I think it is the poorest province in Vietnam. So there really isn't an alternative, and that's problematic to some degree, because a lack of alternative leads to desperation. But this is the situation Fengya is in right now as a community. So I do think that tourists have a much stronger voice, and then it becomes, who are the tourists? So as I said, during COVID, it was Vietnamese tourists going to Fengya, and they have in general, and I do think this is changing, but they have a different approach to how they like to travel. And I think it's just about a country's development. I mean, Vietnam is a fast developing nation, etc., etc. They're coming out of poverty, quite frankly. So, a degree of luxury is sort of a natural inclination. I mean, back in the 70s, a lot of Western people were taking packaged holidays, just because that was sort of the idea at the time. And then slowly things have evolved since then into more sustainable travel, ecotourism. And I think Vietnam will get there. It's just on a different path right now. So yeah, I do think tourists are very much the voice which the local PPC would listen to.
And do you think that the tourists and the local voices, there's some kind of cohesion there, or is it it seems like within the village, from the kind of shots of people talking and kind of expressing themselves freely over a drink, it's very divided. It's not like a clear-cut opinion. And I mean, do you ever feel like, as a filmmaker, you're coming in and you have this kind of your preferred outcome over, maybe, is there any kind of conflict with maybe that of the locals? Is it kind of, how do you get that balance between showing what a sustainable future for that the Songdong would look like and what the locals would want?
So, I mean, for me, the balance is an incredibly important thing, and I didn't realize how important it was until I started to try and structure the film into a coherent narrative which made sense, didn't distill any of the complexities, but was also entertaining. And I realized that I really wanted to get all voices into the film, and I didn't want the film to become an environmental polemic, which is something I've said a few times on these sort of calls, because I do tend to find that is the natural inclination of environmental documentaries and environmental documentaries to turn it into a single voice which shouts for the protection and preservation of something, or saving the planet. And that's obviously that's a valid voice, and those documentaries have an important place, a very important place. But for me, after speaking to so many people over so many years and hearing so many conflicting voices, it would have felt like a betrayal not to include all perspectives. So the film went beyond me and my own personal feelings about the place and what should be done, and it became and has become more of a discussion piece, if you will. And that's really what my ultimate intention is, to present all sides, all voices, and then allow the audience to make up their own minds. I obviously have my opinion, and I'm the filmmaker, but I do feel as though that is very, very separate from the film itself. So yeah, balance was very important to me, and I'm hoping I got it right.
I was going to ask as well about what you feel about sustainable tourism and how what that would look like. What would your hopes be for Songdong? Would it be, I mean, at what point do you draw the line in ecotourism turning into kind of eco-luxury tourism? And I mean, tourism is changing like rapidly, and more people are going towards adventure ecotourism. But do you think it's actually possible to be sustainable and to have a tourism industry in such a kind of ecologically delicate area like Songdong?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question, and I think I think the answer will depend on a lot of factors. Do I think it's possible to conceive of a sustainable future for Fengya? Yes, because I'm an optimist ultimately. Whether that will happen is very much up for debate. I mean, the decisions which people are making, right, this is an evolving situation and an evolving story. The decisions which people are making right now in Fengya will dictate its future. I really mean right now, over the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, case in point, there's a brief shot in the film of the Fengya sign, and then there's a bulldozer in the foreground and a what looks like a deserted building site. And now that is taken at the entrance, if you will, the opening to Fengya, the start of Fengya. It's the first experience tourists have when they visit Fengya, and that building site was going to become a gas station or a petrol station. So the first experience anyone would have, if that had been built, was a huge, horrible eyesore. You have this beautiful paradise behind it, and the first thing you see is a gas station. And that project actually was shut down for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons was that people realized ultimately that this was not a good idea, and that was a good decision to shut down that project, in my view. There are lots of other little decisions like that which are currently being made, and they will all dictate the future. What will happen? I don't know. I'm hopeful that they will build a sustainable path. Is it possible? Yes. Will greed trump everything? I don't know. We'll have to see. But I would like to think that they will make choices which do build a sustainable future.
Nice. And if you were to go back and do the documentary again, what do you think you would do differently?
Oh, that's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that. Yeah, I mean, I'm someone who prefers criticism over praise, because I feel as I can grow from criticism, providing it's constructive. So I always enjoy when people weigh in on the film. A few people have said that they would have liked more local opinions, local voices in the film, and I would have liked to have got a bit more of that in. I think some people confuse the fact that there are people like David Multi-English who is a local business owner. He's lived in Vongya for 10, 15 years, and I think he's an absolute valid voice in the film as a local. But the fact he's Australian and it has a Western perspective, some people think isn't valid as a local voice. I would disagree with that to a point, but I do see people's point of view potentially that there could have been a little bit more insight from locals. I did have that in the film. The film originally, when in its final cut, was 115 minutes long. The final cut, which everyone was just seen as 100 minutes, and a lot of that 15 minutes, which was eventually cut, was locals engaging, talking, discussing, arguing, and people gave me constant feedback that they loved the film, but it was a bit long. Loved the film, but it was a bit long. And so I was responsive to that, and I cut it down to 109 and 104 and 100. And at a certain point, people started to say, oh, I wish I could have a bit more of this. And I realized that I found it at that point. But in some ways, I kind of wish maybe I'd stuck to my guns with the 150-minute cut and just allowed more local voice in. But tricky, it's structuring the film was by far and away the most difficult thing. I mean, filming in Songdon was difficult by myself as I sort of danced from rock to rock, 4 hours sleep, trying not to die and also trying to get the shot. I mean, that was tricky, but structuring the film into a coherent narrative, because it covers a lot of ground, the film, and trying to get it all in a coherent way was really tricky. So I did my best, and yeah, maybe I should have stuck to 150 minutes, but 100 minutes is what it is, and I'm going to stick by that for now.
I mean, how do you draw the line? I mean, how do you decide between one scene and another? I imagine this is probably one of the hardest parts of filmmaking, is creating and collecting all of this amazing footage and then having to somehow form a narrative. And at the same time, things are changing. So the decision for the cable cars not to go into construction, I mean, did that come halfway through you making this documentary, and then that probably required like an entire shift of the narrative again?
So... yeah, I mean, the obviously that announcement was made in 2019, so the narrative is sort of that piece of information is held back until the end of the film, because at the end of the day, I'm a filmmaker, so I need to have an ending. Otherwise it feels incomplete to me. So that piece of information, although that was known, prior to COVID, I held that back towards the end, and COVID did threaten that decision. So I felt that was a valid choice to make. Sorry, I forgot your question. Just remind me again.
I was asking about how when the decision for the cable cars to be constructed was, I mean, they stopped it and they said, we're not going to construct. Did you have to then rechange the entire narrative of the documentary?
No, I didn't. No, because that didn't really affect the structure. COVID affected the structure a lot, because that was a really, I mean, it was that's the biggest since tourism first came to Phongya in roughly about 2011. The pandemic was the most sizable shift in circumstances there since then. So that really did change everything. And while I spent 9 months trying to get back in the country, we started editing and we sort of reconceived things. You were also asking about how I make choices about what scene to include and what not. And the other thing, I'm also the editor on this film, so I don't have a second voice telling me, yeah, well, that should be a bit shorter, etc., etc. So I have to be very, very brutal with myself about what is cut and what isn't. And I thought I was very brutal, and I had this idea that if I can just keep it under 2 hours, it'll be fine. But that was slightly off the mark. So that was a good lesson for me. But the upside to cutting brutally is that there is now a TV version of the film, so a 53-minute cut, which was required for TV sales, etc., etc. So in actual fact, a lot of the material which is not in the 100-minute, well, not a lot, but a good portion of the material which is not in the 100-minute piece, I've actually managed to squeeze into the 53. So I feel as though I've managed to get everything in.
Just about. It's interesting just to go back to what you were saying about the local voices as well, because I was kind of thinking whilst watching the documentary, like, how would it feel to be an outsider coming into the country and making a documentary about something that you're from the outside of? I mean, was that uncomfortable at any point? And also, sorry, this is kind of like two questions in one now, but I was also really curious about the guides themselves and like what they feel about the cable cars. I think that was kind of like one of the things that I felt was missing, was their opinion.
When you say the guides, do you mean the Western cave experts or the porters?
The porters, the local porters. Yeah.
So I'll take the second piece first. So the porters, when I say local voices, those for me are the porters, because ultimately Oxalis employs most of the TAF. So in terms of, I mean, obviously there are people, there are Fongya locals who are not working for Oxalis, not working as part of the Songdong team, but the town itself is, everyone's married to each other. I mean, it's very, very small, so everyone's interconnected. So I mean, there's at least probably one family member in every family working for Oxalis. So for me, local voices are very much the porters, and yeah, I agree with you. I would have liked to include more, and that was the stuff that was cut from 115 minutes. In terms of how they feel, they are. There's obviously difference of opinion. I mean, but when it comes down to one thing, and this is actually said in the film, that they all want what we all want, which is prosperity for their families. That's what they want. They want to be able to build a 2-story house rather than a 1-story house. So when the floods come, and the floods come quite often, every year, every 4 years, they're quite big. If they have a 2-story house, they can move everything to the top floor, and that's an aspiration for a lot of people. So prosperity is kind of the thing which unites everyone, and people have differences of opinion as to how that is achieved. I think the majority feel that the more sustainable approach is, I feel as I'm speaking for a lot of people here, which is a little uncomfortable, but I did spend a lot of time speaking with a lot of people, so I think I can say with a relative confidence the majority do feel that ecotourism is the way forward, because again, not in the film, but for a lot of the guys who work as porters, their main means of providing for their family, a lot of them, was illegal logging in the jungle, and prior to tourism coming to Fongya. So they would go into the jungle and mine it for wood and sell for wood, and that was by far and away better for them financially than working in rice paddies. But of course it comes with huge risks, and actually the Tun, who is the featured porter in the film, he was actually arrested for this, and he was in jail for a number of years as a result. So they are aware that the alternative to tourism is going back to illegally logging, because there really isn't much else if you want to provide for your family. So I do feel as though that they are on board with the eco approach. In terms of how I felt going into the community, I mean, that never really, for better or worse, that never really bothered me, because I don't know, I feel as though I'm quite respectful of people. I never ever go into an interview with an agenda, ever. I always just try and honor the person I'm speaking to, and try not to obviously don't twist their words, but try and represent them as authentically as possible. I mean, as I said, I used the word betrayal before, and that might be a strong word, but I really do feel that the journalistic approach in its pure form is really the only way you can, I feel as though you can make films like this, because if the filmmaker's agenda is paramount, then it's just a piece of narcissism, basically, and I'm not interested in that at all.
It's good to hear. Do you have any future, sorry, we've kind of flitted around in this conversation, but kind of looking ahead again, do you have any future documentaries or films lingering in the kind of any ideas or
Yeah, I mean,
projects?
I have lots of ideas. I mean, I am quite keen on to move on to something else, because this has been, it used to be 5 years, it's now 6 years, because we're into the
Wow.
into the 6 years. So yeah, I am quite keen to move on. In terms of what that is, I mean, I have a long list of things. I was very, very conscious when making this film that, you know, if it had any impact at all, you know, I'd probably want to follow it up with something equally as good. And I realized that about 3 or 4 years ago, to be honest. So I've actually been, since then, quite diligently compiling ideas, and I have a very, very long list of things I've compiled. So, but that's not my focus right now. Distribution of this film is a job unto itself. I'm basically a full-time social media manager right now, so
Wow.
I can't really think about other projects. But once this release is over and I have a bit more headspace, I'm going to go to that list, and we'll see what comes up. So yeah, watch this space.
Nice. Thanks so much, Alistair.